gotta give a like. You gotta give a like before we begin it.
The 2016 United States presidential election was pivotal in recent American history, largely because Donald Trump ignited a surge of populism across the country, a phenomenon not seen since the times of Richard Nixon. 8 years later, his influence remains significant as he seeks re-election in 2024. Trump and his Make America Great movement have become iconic in the ongoing battle between the common man and the elite establishment, or, as he refers to it, the deep state. His campaign is focused on returning power to ordinary citizens and breaking the grip of the deep state for good. Populism.
There we go.
Man and the elite establishment,
something went wrong with
or,
it.
as he refers to it,
Kanye.
the deep state.
Interesting.
His campaign is focused on returning power to ordinary citizens and breaking the grip of the deep state for good. Populism, the belief in the constant struggle between the common people and the wealthy elite, can manifest in different forms. The MAGA movement is just one example. Others include the Occupy Wall Street movement, the Civil Rights movement, and various revolutions and rebellions throughout history. Despite their ideological differences, these groups share a common belief that real change emerges from grassroots movements, where ordinary people rise up to reshape society by forcing the ruling elite to meet their demands. But the level of radicalism and the extent of their goals can vary significantly among these groups. History and revolutions have often been taught to us through a certain lens. The French Revolution was about people rising up against royal tyranny. The American Revolution saw colonists fighting for liberty against British rule, and the Russian Empire fell in 1917.
Yeah, and here's the big difference between all. See these three revolutions? What are they? They're revolutions. They're going against an entire state. It might be grassroots, but they're fighting. They're doing a fighting approach. What are the liberals or conservatives? What's anyone in America gonna do? Are they gonna stand up to the United States military? That's kind of the big difference. Back then, it was a little, it was very different because those governments and the powers, they could be, overthrown by a mass population. Nowadays, though, it doesn't really work like that because people have a lot of luxury resources that are reworked with massive corporate groups. So, for example, let's just say, in the American Revolution, the British didn't really have direct control over every single supply area. So when the Americans, took it all and, took all the guns, they kind of had an upper hand and, took everything. However, we're talking about what if in the American Revolution, it's whole kinds of interest groups that are loyal to the British, and they control, 1/3 of all the houses. And you have a large chunk of people who are, not necessarily from that country either. That's the key thing too. These areas, a lot of people were much more united. Our country's not really united under one banner. We're not really doing that anymore, so you can't really do that. And and the big thing too is that all the institutional groups, right, the companies and the elitists, that's the key thing too. They're not on the side of the Americans, which means you don't have people like the founding fathers stand up, because the founding fathers, they were from the Enlightenment. They were people who were a lot more the elite. So this is a combination of elite and the people. You see what I mean? Let's look at the French Revolution. What happened? It was one without the elite groups, because you need the elite to actually form a nation. When you don't have that, you get the French Revolution where they were literally murdering and destroying and pillaging, and they were barbaric and doing stupidity. And then the Russian Revolution. At least Lenin tried to come off as the new kind of elitist, except the good one, right? The good elitist. And he died while the country was being destroyed and everything was going absolutely horrible until, the dictator Stalin came in, and it was still kind of horrible. But you see what I mean? It's very different than today. And The reason why the Russians even lost to the communists was because there was a war. If America was in a massive war where they were getting destroyed over time, and it wasn't looking good, of course you're gonna have revolutions. So this is why populism will not work today. It might have worked back then because everyone was looking much more similar and had much more better political discourse. People were a lot more unified together under a banner. We're much more divided. It's so unrealistic that we could be able to do that. Only, it's like 50% of the population is willing to fight for you as long as you have the stuff that they like. Ranting on too much, though.
Working class could no longer tolerate oppression. This perspective paints revolutions as a classic struggle between the people and the ruling elite. But
I like
what
the elite.
if
I want
we've
to
been
be the
getting
elite.
it wrong? And this view only captures part of the story. This is what I and others call the populist delusion, which also happens to be the title of the book this video is based on. Make sure to check it out. I highly recommend it. The idea that societal and political change comes solely from grassroots movements where the common people rise up against the establishment to bring it.
I've noticed since I was maybe 11, you need some kind of big group to help lead it. I didn't care that much, but I knew it was a thing, and I think anyone really understanding that has to understand that you need more than just the people, which, what is even the people, right? You just got a lot of groups of people that are really poor. They don't really have much money, and the middle class, they play a significant role, but what are they gonna do, really? They're not as organized. If you really give them money and a good economy, they're not gonna fight for you. So populism only forms when there's problems going on with the nation, or a large group of people are really lacking in help, right? That's how I see it. How do you have populism when things are going good? That's kind of the big thing. It's only when we're having these problems when populism is becoming the idea, but this is not the way to go. The goal should be to take over these institutions, not try and overthrow them where they have way more power than the people, really. It's an illusion of democracy.
As the saying goes,
it's an illusion that we have power, really.
We are the 99%, they are the 1%.
Yeah,
the harsh reality is that
has 99% of power.
Change throughout history
you only have one.
Has often been driven not by the masses, but by other elites at the top. When those in power want to reshape
society, I gotta let him talk to you. This is a 31-minute video. I'm sorry.
They deploy their vast resources and influence to create the appearance of widespread public support. They do this through legal frameworks, state-backed media, education systems, or corporate lobbying. For instance, movements like the civil rights movement of the 1960s, various LGBT advocacy efforts, Black Lives Matter, Greta Thunberg's climate activism, and Extinction Rebellion may seem grassroots at first glance, but they often have backing and guidance from the existing power structure.
There's evidence to that. Walmart gave Black Lives Matter millions of dollars. Greta Thunberg was famous on the media and highly promoted. You had the pride flag be waved in many federal organizations, groups. You had Martin Luther King. Guess what? Who shot him? It was probably the CIA. And after they shot him and realized that it would backfire, they supported all this stuff. And they didn't shoot him just because he was black or in the movement. They probably shot him because he was causing the Black Panthers to become more popular or something. If you don't know, there was a group called the Black Panthers who were murdering people and committing crimes, and Martin Luther was trying to rearrange things better, and he was trying to fix everything up for their movement. He did a lot of foolish things, and after a while he did get massive support from the government because they realized they can exploit this. And then finally, I have no idea who the Extinction Movement is, but they're probably funded by a big group. So if it's not government, it's corporations. Not corporations, it's government. They usually back these groups because they know they gain more power from mental illness.
The real struggle is between the ruling elite and the counter-elite. Revolutions occur when the existing ruling class loses the capability and motivation to stay in power, leading to widespread public discontent. This creates an opening for a counter-elite group to step in and take control. Rebellions happen, revolutions are engineered. What distinguishes this counter-elite group is
Remember all the revolutions. Eventually you get someone powerful to take over. The French Revolution's a perfect example. Napoleon took over. You had the American Revolution. That one always had a better formation. It wasn't just mindless populism like the French Revolution kind of did. But who took over? It was mostly, guess what? The elite people, the richest that took over, right? And they were the Founding Fathers. The Founding Fathers were the 1%. They were amazing, and we love and embrace them. And then, what about the Russian Revolution? Surely not that one. Same thing from those three examples. And there's other, completely other revolutions that we overlook that also had a very similar thing, right? Look at every single time China broke up and then came back together. It's always some powerful guy that comes in and rearranges everything. Look at all the revolutions in Africa, right? All these groups that broke out, they always have some elite group that takes over. South Africa, right? Once Britain left, a very powerful elite group took over, and that's kind of how it always works.
Cohesive structure and strong discipline, enabling them to seize power when the current leadership falters. In contrast, popular uprisings without elite support, like the January 6th Capitol riot, the Yellow Vest protests, or the Canadian Freedom Convoy, are swiftly suppressed. That's the focus of today's
Don't give a shit about us.
I aim to show you that quote-unquote...
Remember, when the January 6th happened, you had like 2 years where people were completely freaked out, the media lied about everything. You just, you can't have strong movements from the right. And then when the left does it, they're just murdering and pillaging and burning. So no one really wins.
Grassroots popular movements are mostly a myth. I want to reveal the truth about how power truly operates. It's rarely derived from democratic or popular sources. It's almost always in the hands of a well-organized minority, not the majority. This has been the reality since the beginning of society. Before we dive in, let me clarify that my point isn't that you are powerless and should simply accept your fate. I'm approaching power and politics.
I don't know. Maybe.
From a realist perspective. If you want to change a country politically or socially, you can't do it with populist...
Right before we get back to it, I got this new hat for my birthday. I really like it. I'll wear it for the rest of the time. But back to it. I'm really sorry.
Tactics. Change doesn't happen by convincing the most people to see things your way or by waiting for the masses to reach a tipping point and then overthrow the establishment.
I think a really good example too is my YouTube channel, because I gained 2,000 subs from Minecraft. And then they did nothing. They gave me really no one really stuck by. You just had random people watch the videos. And you go to my most popular shorts to prove that. No one sticks around. But I have people comment with my historical videos and with my, much more complicated, interesting content. The content I cared more about, you had a lot of people that come back and really care about this stuff. And that's kind of how I see it. I think you really need a small group who are intelligent and strong, and they know what they're doing. And, I think that's, I want to be that one day. I don't have the viewership or subscribers. I gotta learn to become better. That's my goal.
Change always requires concentrated strategic organization. Ultimately, power doesn't care how many likes your Twitter post received. The goal of this video is to expose and explain why the populist approach to changing society and politics is largely an illusion.
New theory.
This school of thought, which argues that change is driven from the top down rather than the bottom up, was championed by Gaetano Mosca, a key figure in Italian elite theory. In 1895, Mosca published his seminal work, The Ruling Class, which laid the groundwork for this perspective. So what better way to kick off this video than by delving into the ideas of the man who shaped this theory. Across all types of societies, whether they're in the early stages of development or highly sophisticated and powerful, one thing remains consistent. There are two classes of people. There's a class that rules and a class that is ruled. This is so obvious that even a casual glance can reveal it. But if it's so clear, why do we need to point it out? It's because we need to make it clear that the idea of popular sovereignty, that the people hold ultimate power, is inherently flawed. Because societies always have a ruling class and a ruled class, it's impossible for the people to be sovereign. Instead, power is always concentrated in the hands of a well-organized minority that leads and governs. As Mosca points out very clearly, quote, "In reality, the dominion of an organized minority, obeying a single impulse over the unorganized majority, is inevitable. The power of any minority is irresistible as against each single individual in the majority who stands alone before the totality of the organized minority. 100 men acting uniformly in concert with a common understanding will triumph over 1,000 men who are not in accord and can therefore be dealt with one by one."
It's all about the idea of quantity versus quality. The quality will always outdo the quantity in this area, because you're going to have the few who are going to be very knowledgeable. They know what they're doing. They're intelligent. And they're high in connections. Meanwhile, you have people who don't have connections, who don't really know much. You know, their IQ is much lower. They're not stupid, but they're not really knowledgeable in this area. And, you know, there's a lot of them, a whole bunch, but it's almost like sheep, right? You're going to have the shepherd who knows how to take care of the sheep, and knows how to really arrange everything and put things in order. It's a hierarchy. Humans are always going to be in a hierarchy because that's how God arranged it. And that's kind of the lie of communism, where, you know, I've already butchered this enough, or not butchered, but beat a dead horse enough, where I've always said how, you know, communism doesn't work because of how it's against human nature. Humans are always going to have hierarchies. Communism is trying to make everyone equal. We already know that stuff. I think the next step to really look at is that we have to now attack populism, because it tries to be kind of a different type of communism. Like a more soy version in some areas. I don't know. And the idea is you get popular grassroots movements, and, you know, like, look at the 2016 election. Trump won, but the people who really have the power are the ones that, you know, pass the laws, that actually get things done. Did Trump actually get things done? You only had 500 miles of the border. The border wasn't complete, though. You had, you know, the crime got fixed in a good amount, but what else did Trump do? He was massively trying to pander towards the black communities, and, you know, tried to really get more of the minority vote, right? That's what he was also trying to do, which is a little ironic because the most populated group is the whites, but who cares, right? But, you know, like, you know, he only abolished ISIS many years later. Trump also got, you know, not really much done with the Middle East. He stuck there for quite a while and didn't get the troops out until, like, you know, it passed the law, and then Joe Biden got it through. You see what I mean, though? Look at all these problems. He wasn't able to really do that much just because, guess what? It's the people who really swing the decisions, that really make the decisions, that have all the power. It was, you know, and, you know, he had a majority over the House and Senate, though. Yet nothing got done. It's not really, I think, because Trump's a grifter. I think he does care about the people. However, I think the problem really is that he got pressured to, you know, staying back because he thought that a lot of these groups would help him, but they don't like him or his rhetoric, so they had to take him out. That's what happened. So in the 2020 election, you know, who knows? It could have been rigged, could not have been rigged. I don't really know anymore. But what we do know is that doesn't matter if you win an election or win 5 elections. We had George Bush win an election. We became from going against homosexuality to, Obama wins. Okay, now homosexual, marriage is legal and all that stuff.
Meanwhile, it will be easier for the former to act in concert and have a mutual understanding simply because they are 100 and not 1,000. It follows that the larger the political community, the smaller will the proportion of the governing minority in the governed majority be, and the more difficult will it be for the majority to organize for reaction against the minority. This raises an intriguing question. Why does the majority put up with the rule of the minority? Disorganization aside, what's stopping them from overthrowing the minority, given that they vastly outnumber them? According to Mosca, it's because they accept the quote-unquote political formula of the ruling class. This political formula is the idea or belief that legitimizes the power of the rulers. Mosca offers 2 main examples of political formulas based on religious beliefs, like the divine right of kings, and those based on the concept of popular sovereignty or the will of the people. Or, better yet, we could call them ideologies. When there's a sense of moral unity between those in power and the people they govern, truly remarkable things can happen to a nation or movement. This unity can lead to the defeat of stronger enemies in war. Consider the Viet Cong, the Taliban, and various so-called barbarian groups like the Franks who took on the Romans during the decline of their empire. However, this moral unity needs to be present not only among the people, but also within the ruling class. Even if the majority is united, they can still lose if their leaders lack cohesion. Mosca mentions the example of the Kingdom of Naples fighting the French in the late 18th century. Despite the people's unity, their pro-French leaders' betrayal undermined their chances of success. This kind of treachery can weaken resistance, disorganize the military, and dilute the power of popular resistance, which might otherwise have prevailed. The opposite can also occur. If leaders are united, but the people they govern don't share their vision, the ruling class is likely to fail. No ruling elite can maintain power without a political formula that resonates with those they lead. As German-American political scientist Hans Meisel points out in his book analyzing Mosca and the elite theory, quote, "Ruling classes may fail to adapt their formula to the changed demands of society, or ruling classes may renew themselves or be renewed. In the first case, failure to renew the formula may signal the end of the ruling class. In the second case, the formula might be retained. The British Crown would be a good example." Wait. If Mosca believed that a political formula creating unity between the ruled and the ruling class was so vital, why did he argue that the political concept of popular sovereignty, the power of the people, should be exposed as a lie? Doesn't this contradict his views? Academic Agent explains this very well in his book, which again is the backbone of this video. Quote, "First, remember that Mosca's goal was not to instruct rulers in the art of politics, but rather to outline a science of politics which sees things in the cold light of day. Second, Mosca saw the political formula of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, and fraternity, as being entirely destructive because it is impossible to put into practice. The democratic principle is simply one wrong-headed offshoot of this. Mosca points out that the will of the people and the notion of divine right are both, in practice, taken on faith and are beyond reason. But the will of the people, unlike divine right, is the product of Enlightenment rationalism and is demonstrably false. This falsity has practical and often violent consequences which supernatural beliefs do not. But I would also like to add, while the unity between the ruled and the ruling class is important, and while the establishment could crumble due to the lack of support among the majority, it doesn't mean that the people are in power and will get their demands met. What actually happens in most cases is the counter-elite seizing their moment to take charge, all the while hijacking public discontent to legitimize their newfounded rule. That is why we keep hearing revolutionaries shouting that they are fighting in the name of the people, all the while their regimes, like France under Robespierre and Russia under Lenin, would do unspeakable atrocities in the name of the people, ironically, against the people themselves. It's this weird paradox. The ruling establishment cannot survive without at least some support from those they rule, but when their authority crumbles, it will just lead to a new elite stepping in to take their place, and whether that elite is actually fighting for the people or just taking advantage of the unrest is another story. So in the end, the only thing the people can do is show dissatisfaction and anger towards the establishment, which will just get taken advantage of by another elite seeking to overthrow the current one. No matter how you see it, the people aren't truly in power either way. Mosca didn't believe in a simple explanation for history, where one single thing is the reason everything happens. He thought that political ideas are important, but they're not the only thing that shapes history. Because of this, Mosca's view of how regimes change, the process of one ruling class taking over from another, is more complex and adaptable. Quote, "As soon as there is a shift in the balance of political forces, then the manner in which the ruling class is constituted changes also. If a new source of wealth develops in a society, if a practical importance of knowledge grows, if an old religion declines or a new one is born, if a new current of ideas spreads, then, simultaneously, far-reaching dislocations occur in the ruling class." Mosca believed that the main forces driving history are changes to quote-unquote social forces. These changes can come from shifts in economic conditions, new technology, or fresh ideas. By social forces, Mosca meant the key groups in society, like business people, farmers, intellectuals, and the military. If the ruling class can't adapt to these changes, they will be replaced by a new class that is better suited to lead in the new environment. This all sounds very cool and dandy, but this shouldn't apply to our modern system. This all sounds more like something about a feudal monarchy. Today we have democracy. The people are the ones actually in charge and picking their rulers. It is the whole reason why democracy developed, to actually give the people a right to choose where their country should be headed, and the old aristocratic system was abolished. Right? Right?
What about democracy? And it's true. This is all of these groups, Republicans and Democrats. I mean, it's in their name. Democrats and Republicans. They're only democracies and, republics. And they don't really understand. They just don't actually get it. Whoever gets in power, things don't really change. What you really need to do is you gotta take on the institutional powers, and I keep saying institution. What is institution? Like the, bureaucrats, you gotta take over the corporations, you gotta take over the, Harvards, you gotta take over the elites. And how do you take over the elite when they're so powerful? Well, the solution you would need to do is you gotta make them want to change. You have to destroy really like what they believe in. I think one good example is the Soviet Union. You gotta what happened there was they all kind of gave up in communism and it all fell apart. And so those elite groups were, gone, and you saw what happened after that. So I think the solution would need to be that you gotta make a lot of these groups kind of have doubt about all of these, the idea of the neoliberalism, and they gotta doubt it, and then you kind of have to offer a new solution, and that's how you take over. Which I think the good news is we've been kind of seeing it. No one likes what's going on today. It's not even just the majority of the people. It's a lot of these also very high-powered and elite groups. A lot of them are also doubting our democracy. You gotta give it a little while longer, and we gotta stop sticking with populism. We gotta stick with becoming the solution more than just complaining, because there's no solution in populism. What we need to do is take over the elite and, give an olive branch to many who want to change. That's what we would have to do.
When debating systems like monarchy versus democratic republic, Republicans often argue that democracy allows people to choose who leads their nation, highlighting the appeal of a system where harmful leaders can be voted out. This marks a shift from the old system of hereditary tyranny to one where power is ostensibly in the hands of the people. But how does Mosca's thesis apply to democracy? Has this system truly transformed, or have the elites simply adapted their methods of maintaining control? As previously mentioned, Mosca was highly skeptical about democracy and whether the people are truly empowered in it. He writes, quote, "What happens in other forms of government, namely that an organized minority imposes its will on the disorganized majority, happens also and to perfection, whatever the appearances to the contrary, under the representative system. When we say that the voters quote-unquote choose the representative, we are using a language that is very inexact. The truth is that the representative has himself elected by the voters, and, if that phrase should seem too inflexible and too harsh to fit some cases, we might qualify it by saying that his friends have him elected. In elections, as in all other manifestations of social life, those who have the will, and especially the moral, intellectual, and material means to force their will upon others, take the lead over the others and command them. These friends of elected officials tend to be rich individuals who can afford to fund politicians to advance their specific agendas, often at the expense of the broader public's interests. These wealthy figures often own newspapers and other media outlets, granting them the power to control the narrative and shape public opinion to their advantage. Furthermore, the candidates who run for office are often pre-selected by these same elites. Their campaigns are typically orchestrated by tight-knit groups that work to ensure that the election results align with their own goals. As a result, even though elections might appear democratic, the outcomes frequently reflect the wishes of those powerful minorities. According to Mosca, in the best-case scenario, democracy functions as an elected oligarchy. In another book, Political Elites by Gerard Perry, he writes in regards to this thesis, quote, "The elitist argument goes beyond the simple idea that a small group makes decisions while most people follow them. That's an obvious point that doesn't really explain how politics works. It's almost a given that fewer people make the rules while more people follow them. The elitist argument is much stronger. It states that when societies use democratic systems, the majority can never truly control the powerful minority. No matter how democratic things seem, the dominant minority always finds ways to stay in control and can't be held back by
and the difference, this is why, one of the big reasons why monarchy is better than democracy is because in a monarch system, you know who's the leaders, you know the groups. In a democracy, you don't really know. Sure, you could say the president, but how many people can name on the top of their head the Speaker of the House, or even people in the Senate or in the House in general? Can you name Larry Fink, right, the CEO of BlackRock, who makes many lobbying and political affiliations with a lot of politicians? No one can really know these people. No one really knows who they are, and that's the people that we know of. There's a lot that it's just you don't even realize it.
The reason why Mosca was not fond of democracy isn't that he wanted an autocracy where people did not have a say in how their country should be ruled, but rather that the structure has changed, but the fundamental dynamics of power have not. Elites continue to exert their influence, not through outright hereditary succession, but through political campaigns, media, lobbying, and other mechanisms that shape public perception and ensure their continued dominance. The key question is whether the democratic process truly empowers the people or simply gives the illusion of control while the elites maintain their grip on power. Patrick Deneen, in his seminal work, Why Liberalism Failed, also points this out. Quote, "At its inception, liberalism promised to displace an old aristocracy in the name of liberty. Yet as it eliminates every vestige of an old order, the heirs of their hopeful anti-aristocratic forebears regard its replacement as a new, perhaps even more pernicious, kind of aristocracy. This doesn't mean that elected officials can never challenge the existing establishment. Keep in mind that once they gain significant power, they become part of an elite, or, in some cases, a counter-elite. A classic example is the rise of Adolf Hitler. He wasn't born into privilege and experienced poverty, yet he climbed the ranks to become one of the most powerful leaders of his time. However, while his success in winning parliamentary seats through elections contributed to his rise, it wasn't a key factor. Remember, Hitler's appointment as chancellor was based on the belief that the ruling establishment
And
could...
remember, the courts. This is a key thing. The courts felt bad. They sympathized with Hitler, so they gave him a really light punishment. So bam, he already has a little, little control over the court system, right? He has influence over that. What else does he do, right? He, wins the election, but he didn't win multiple elections. What he did was he takes over, then he kind of just closes down the parliament. How? Because many groups sympathized with Hitler and liked Hitler, and they decided to give him that power and to see if they would get a position with Hitler. And you also had the chancellor, willing to give that up to Hitler, and he became, they were able to bring him in power. And the original plan was, let's just make him the chancellor so we can control him and make our little puppet, but those guys backfires, they're kind of done for. And guess what? Hitler takes in power, and you saw what happened.
Control him. Yet through cunning political strategy and a fair amount of luck, he outmaneuvered the elites, ultimately gaining the upper hand and reshaping the government according to his vision.
If Hitler can do it,
is that political and societal change doesn't occur just because someone wins the most votes and takes office.
The real he only won like 28, or not 28, it was like 30% of the vote. Above 30, something like that. He only won like 33% of the votes, something like that. So 1/3 was on his side. He was still the minority, but he had a large amount of groups and institutions on his side.
Battle begins after the election, when the new leader confronts the establishment to assert control. This is a high-stakes political game where the public has little influence over the outcome. Voting alone won't determine the winner. It comes down to the leader's skill, strategy, and often luck. In many cases, even those who gain power find themselves constrained by the existing elite. The German sociologist Robert Michels, who I am going to go into detail up next, also shared this view. Quote, "For the will of the people is not transferable, nor even the will of the single individual. In actual fact, directly after the election is finished, the power of the masses over the delegate comes to an end."
The iron law of oligarchy.
So regarding Michels, he is also an important figure in this discussion. Drawing directly from Oscar and a few others, he is the one who came up with the iron law of oligarchy. The iron law of oligarchy states that all forms of organization, regardless of how democratic they may be at the start, will eventually and inevitably develop oligarchic tendencies.
And we've always kind of had that too. It's not just here, because a lot of people, like to forget about our, how what's happened in the past. Like, with the American Revolution even. You had a lot of the founding fathers. They had the power. They really had most, if not all, the control over, everything. They controlled they were the ones writing the Constitution. And then you had after that, the party, who was it? Thomas Jefferson's party? His party, I believe it was called the Democrat Party. They were becoming the elite party. They were becoming much stronger and much more powerful. The Republicans then take over and defeat the Democrats with the Civil War. Then you had the Republicans now the power. They might have lost an election or two, but they never lost those, bureaucratic centers. They never really lost the corporations that were on their side. Teddy Roosevelt was kind of a populist, but he also wanted, he was still kind of fair in a lot of ways. But then after Teddy, here's where things get a little bit bad. you get the Democrats kind of getting back into power with Woodrow Wilson, not really, Calvin Coolidge, all these people, right? They win. It's like going this way until the 30s. Then FDR gets in power. Then the new power comes, the new reign from the Republicans now becoming the dominant power to the Democrats. And FDR was overwhelmingly voted in. And it wasn't just victories in elections. He also controlled everyone in the offices. And then the Republicans make a foolish decision by, what was it, like they were the ones that got the law passed that would limit how many terms you can win, which is just foolish because now they lost their ability to really project power. And then they lost more and more as the Democrat Party became more bureaucratic, more institutional, and a little more of a professional and orthodoxy. And then the status quo became neoliberalism, right? You have Lyndon B. Johnson. Then you had your Nixon. Then you had what happened after Nixon was Jimmy Carter. But you see the left pushes. They become stronger. Every time a Republican wins, nothing happens. Nixon, Ford, nothing happened. Ronald Reagan even, nothing happened, right? You saw, wasn't that the height of homosexuality in the 80s? Wasn't that, like, feminism was still growing massively, if not, it might have hit its peak. Right, in the 80s, you had the height of, one of the height of some areas of liberalism. Not as much today, but you still had, the height of, like, the college, the whole college campuses and the students. And guess what? They're all grown up and now they're the ones in power.
Thus making true democracy practically and theoretically impossible, especially in large groups and complex organizations. What makes Michel's unique to Mosca is that he applies this rule to any form of organization, whether that would be large families, totems, tribes, cities, nations, and so forth. As he writes, quote, "Organization implies a tendency to oligarchy. In every organization, whether it be a political party, a professional union, or any other association of any kind, the aristocratic tendency manifests itself very clearly. As a result of organization, every part or professional union becomes divided into a minority of directors and a majority of directed. Who says organization says oligarchy." What does he mean by organization and oligarchy? An organization is a group of people working together in a structured way, with each person having a specific role. A part of this group is responsible for maintaining the structure or something very similar to it. Oligarchy is an organization where certain roles, usually those with the most power, often called leadership or executive roles, are not controlled by the rest of the group. This concept can be summed up as irresponsible leadership. It doesn't mean the leaders can ignore everyone else. They still need to consider how their actions will be received. But within the limits of the system, they have the freedom to do what they want. The iron law of oligarchy provides a simple explanation for why the leftist takeover of American and European institutions since 1945 has been so successful. They didn't have to convince everyone or even the majority within organizations to agree with their views. They just had to take control of key leadership positions to push their agenda. Most university students aren't activists, they're generally uninterested. As Michel's noted about young trade union members, quote, "They are heedless, their thoughts run in erotic channels. They are always hoping some miracle will deliver them from the need of passing their whole lives as simple wage earners." There are several practical reasons why the iron law of oligarchy happens. There is the issue about mass and scale. Large, complex organizations, as opposed to smaller and simpler ones, tend to become more controlled by a few leaders due to technical and tactical reasons. The first reason is mechanical. When you have thousands or even millions of people, it's impossible to gather them all in one place. Even voting becomes a challenge with so many people. You have to narrow down their choices to a few main ones. Most people don't have the time or interest to constantly participate in voting or decision making. Michels, who observed the Social Democratic Party of Germany, noticed that, quote, committees set up to organize the day-to-day running of the party were systematically unattended. Because of this, the democratic principle has to give way to the oligarchical principle for practical reasons. However, even if we found a way to solve the problem with technology and crowdsourcing, there's still a technical issue. There are countless bureaucratic tasks that must be managed to keep the organization running. A political party aiming for power has to handle finances, administration, and diplomacy. It must also organize voting, canvass supporters, provide information to speakers, raise funds, and maintain its legal status. But the third reason is perhaps the most striking, beyond just technical reasons. It is that the masses simply will not and cannot organize. As Michels wrote, quote, the most striking proof of the organic weakness of the mass is furnished by the way in which, when deprived of the leaders in time of action, they abandon the field of battle in disordered flight. They seem to have no power of instinctive reorganization, and are useless until new captains arise capable of replacing those that have been lost. In recent times, there is no...
I think we can get one great answer to this. Warfare is a really good metaphor for this. Who will win? A general, a very genius general with around 100 men? Or 5,000 men who have no general, have no leadership, and no one is willing to take the reins? Who's going to win? The 5,000 men that are just running around? Or the 100 well-organized, well-structured men? Doesn't matter how many guns you got. Doesn't matter how many men you've got. If you're able to be way better organized, you win. I think like Vietnam, a lot of good examples like in Afghanistan, right? When you had, great outnumbering, the well-structured, organized groups would win, right? The Viet Cong were able to reorganize, and their leaders were able to take the reins and lead the nation. And then same thing with the Taliban, like they were highly centralized of a system. And the USA had a bunch of troops, when no one was able to really take the reins, no one knew what was going on, no one knew what to do. It just fell into chaos. And then Afghanistan it went all the way back to the Taliban. That's just what happens. Organized groups do better, even when they are smaller in numbers. In fact, smaller numbers actually would make it easier to organize over large amount of numbers. Look at when you are marching, when you have, which one's gonna be faster? How are you gonna, which group is gonna be able to actually get to the other side quicker? 1 million men, or just 1,000 men? It's gonna be the 1,000 men because it's much closer and well organized. People are more familiar with each other, and it really just helps out. You don't want to roll call everyone. You can't roll call. The solution would mean you would have to get way more elite, powerful people, and to be there for each person and stuff. And you would have to overcomplicate it to a mass extent. And that's how I think a lot of stuff has changed. Look at back then. It was much easier to have organization and mass conquering. And now it's a little bit slower. I mean, you generally have better, the technology, like better communication, has definitely helped out, but in the end, still can be very difficult to organize millions and millions of men. I mean, World War II, you saw how Hitler had millions of soldiers come into place, and it can easily fall apart if you don't have good leadership.
Better example than the infamous January 6th incident, when Donald Trump distanced himself from the mob, and without a clear leader, they became disorganized and started doing whatever, with no direction and purpose. There was no plan, no coordination, and no leadership. But what about direct democracy? All of these things could apply to representative democracy, but in a direct one, the people are the ones who directly choose legislation, rather than the representatives. Well, Michels also beautifully points out the inherent flaws of direct democracy as well, suggesting that it doesn't solve the main issue at hand here. Just a quick note, I have tweaked and reworded the following passages to be more simple and easily digestible, but the overall message and argument is still the same if you check out the work. It's just a little more simplified. Quote, "The system seems straightforward and effective at first glance, suggesting it would work smoothly. However, it might not meet its designers' expectations if actually implemented. The ideal of direct democracy is about the masses governing themselves based on decisions from popular assemblies. This system reduces reliance on representatives, but it doesn't prevent a small group from gaining too much power. It shifts the role of leaders directly to the people, yet the crowd can be easily swayed by skilled speakers. Also, because this kind of direct democracy doesn't allow for...
Like, I really want max level charisma, just so I can get, like, 5 million people immediately on my side, just like that. Max level charisma people do the best.
Through discussions or careful consideration, it's easier for determined and clever individuals to quickly seize control or influence outcomes. Dominating a large crowd is easier than influencing a small group. A crowd quickly and completely aligns with ideas once swayed, and it strongly resists opposition from a few people or an individual. Large groups gathered closely together are more prone to sudden fears, unthinking excitement, and similar reactions than smaller groups where members can calmly discuss and reflect on issues. It's a common observation that large public meetings often approve proposals with loud approval or unanimous agreement, whereas if the same gatherings were divided into smaller groups of about 50 people, the decisions would be more cautiously made. At major party conventions attended by key members, actions and words tend not to be considered as carefully as they would be by individuals or small groups within these large gatherings. The individual often gets lost in the crowd, losing personal identity and sense of responsibility.
Yeah, and I think also, real quick too, I think what we need to notice too is that not everyone is going to be out of the... Like, you know how they call it the Matrix or, you know, the rat race? There's gonna, you know, not everyone's gonna get out of that. The dark reality is the majority, but a very large majority, are always gonna be NPCs the rest of their life. We can't say that that's, you know, like, you know, good, but, like, what we can do at the very least is change things and, you know, reform it for better. Because, like, look at the old monarchs. Everyone was much more communal. The structure was that you work and you provide for your family. And there was so much to live for. God, you know, your family, your faith, you know, faith, family, your country, your fatherland, right? You had a lot of values to fight for. But now people don't feel like they should fight for anything. Why do you think suicide is so high? People are depressed. There's nothing to fight for anymore for this country. No one likes this country anymore. No one has any, you know, faith in this, in not just the country, but faith in themselves. Young people are, you know, becoming more and more secular, and what we see is just mass depression. Young people are most likely to commit suicide. They're dying by such a massive rate. They're becoming more and more worse, mentally ill. The reality is we need God, and we need to follow Him, and we need to really have, you know, it doesn't really matter as much. Like, look at this. Look at this way. God is only one, yet He's able to have all this power and be able to really do everything perfectly. He's literally the ultimate, I guess you could call elite. God is the elite of all, and we do not resist Him. We do not, you know, like, look at the Tower of Babel. They all were resisting Him. They all said, we don't need you. We got our own mass movements of people. We all are united together against you, God. And what happened? God smited a tower. They all got wiped down. They all fell from their pride. And that's the thing we need to realize.
Phenomenon highlights a significant issue with the idea of mass sovereignty. Not only does it show the problematic nature of crowd behavior, but it also points to the practical challenges of implementing direct democracy on a large scale. The iron law of oligarchy is what nails the last nail in the coffin of populism. If populism sticks true to itself, where the masses collectively work together to topple the elite, they are gonna fail miserably with
Yeah.
no progress made. But if a leadership emerges that is an
It
oligarchy,
would like frick it up because all of these people may disagree with them, and then everyone disagrees, and there's no cohesion. It's exactly true.
to lead the revolt against the elites, then you are already back at square one, because you have a minority that rules and leads and a majority that follows. Because of this
Yeah.
very simple
The one
concept,
thing though is that what will the minority side be? What will they do? What do they want? Because what my goal really is that I want the elite to have the goal of making sure our country is good. They benefit as long as our country is successful. That's what it should be. As long as their country is sticking with a higher amount of Christianity, sticking with the right values, they succeed and they're able to do what they need to do, right? That should be the order. That should be the system, because then they're gonna, help. They're going to side with the Christian morality because they benefit off of it, and they'll also probably join Christian morality. They'll join within it. You had many market groups convert religions even because they knew it would be better off for them. Yeah, in Indonesia, the reason why it's so Muslim today was because all those groups before all the market, especially the elite people, they converted, so that way they were able to really have better trade with the Muslims. And guess what happened? You had a switch to how the system went. Same thing with Mongolia. They converted to Islam, and that was the new elite system. So religion can really shift a system, and what we have is really no religion anymore. All of our institutions are secular. We need to bring back God and faith within it, and you would really have a lot of good changes. But it would take a very hard amount of effort. It would take maybe even decades. I might not live all the way to being able to change that. Hitler was a very rare exception to the many times when it took decades.
true populism is quite literally impossible. So, if this is the case, then what can we do to change it? The answer is you can't. Hierarchies are natural in every human society. True collective leadership, where every person has the same amount of power, is just a fairy tale.
It's just human nature, man.
As I have established in the video, governments by the people and of the people simply do not exist. But that does not mean that governments for the people are impossible. Just because there is a hierarchy, just because the circulation of elites and those well-off is inevitable,
And the reason why people find the of the people appealing is that because they're the people, and it's like, oh, I'm with that, right? Yeah, I'm really making change here. No, like, if we really did a self-reflection, people, they would realize that they're not all of that. We're not all of that. And, even I realize that. I think a lot of humans are too prideful. We're too stubborn a lot of the time to realize that we're not really our best leaders. We really need a powerful group to really lead. We act all like children with a lot of these decision-making and who we vote for. I mean, for crying out loud, Joe Biden acts like a child. You really need a powerful leader. You really need a strong leader who's going to be able to really take care of the people and help the people and keep things prosperous and do what's best for the people. And that's kind of how it works. You can't really have some kind of grassroots thing or a movement. It doesn't work. Even when even if we did have a revolution, which it would never really happen, but even then, what will happen then, right? Okay, Trump gets into power, then what? We will collapse. Because as much as these people are awful, we still kind of need them to run some stuff. We can't get rid of them, we can replace them. And that's the thing, it's about replace. It's not about getting rid of. Kind of like what Trump said about like the healthcare system in 2016. It was not about getting rid of it. It was about repealing it to a better. That's what we have to do.
It doesn't mean that they inherently want to keep the people down and miserable. History has shown that there were numerous instances where kings, nobles, presidents, politicians, and so forth tried their best to empower the little man and frequently squabbled with other elites. A notable example is the 16th century German Peasants' War. It is considered the biggest popular revolt before the French Revolution, with peasants fighting for their rights to bring down noble tyranny. And yet the peasant leadership wasn't compromised of commoners, but preachers like Thomas Müntzer and noblemen like Florian Geyer. Again, the instance of the counter-elite. In fact, if you look at more examples throughout history, monarchs have more or less sided more with commoners and the lower classes against the aristocracy. The conflict has almost always been between aristocrats and monarchs. Remember, the Magna Carta wasn't championed by the peasants, but aristocrats seeking to limit the power of the king and
100% true. There was a lot of elite groups that were completely pissed off by John, so they did that whole reorganizing. It was never the people doing that. So it's a fight between one group and, which would be the monarch, and the other one, which would just be the elite area, aristocrats and bureaucrat groups. And mostly the people really they didn't do much. They were they were mostly there. They were the soldiers, they were the farmers, they were the production, they were the machine that was part of it. They didn't really care too much as long as things were getting better for them. That was kind of the thing. It was like, oh, the king is doing this policy and it works? Cool. I don't care about voting because what if I vote this guy into power? What if we vote some other guy when the monarch's already doing good? And that's how we would have to manage it. You would need a strong king and someone who really does well. And I hate that whole argument of like, what if the king's bad? Okay, what if every single leader we have is bad, right? Like we could do the same thing. What if Joe Biden and Trump are bad? But what if the king is bad? Okay, shut up, bro. It's like we have horrible results. Meanwhile, the kings actually do good. So I'm sticking with the kings just because you have better results. And to a utilitarian perspective, 100%, the king works best. Right? You need the best high quality. You need the person who's like taught from birth what to do and how to lead. It's like the whole trust the experts, right? Which, if we have someone who grew up, 50 years experience, kind of like how the knights were taught. They were taught from like 7 years old how to be a knight. They take a long time and learn and have massive experience. Would you rather have that? Or someone who's never really done this stuff in quite a while and kind of edge to it. Doesn't really know how to be a leader as much. Right, has some level of experience, and even when we think of like Obama or Clinton or the Bush or these people that been in office for decades and stuff, even then they don't do anything right because they're not really creating the correct social coherence. I think the other problem too is that they really think they're the minority, quote unquote, or sorry, not minority, but the majority. They think they're the group that's being oppressed, and they try to act like the middle class, right? Like we had the Scranton Joe, Mid-Atlantic Joe, I'm the average Joe, that stuff. And Trump's rich kid, but he definitely also tries to do that. Every single one of our leaders just tries to come off as, oh, we're for the people. And now we have this 50% versus 50%. Instead of just saying we're for the people, how about you say we're, for God. We're for creating the correct way of running the country. And, whether all the people like it or not, we're still going to do it because it's going to benefit in the long term. Right, that's how it all goes. And, it's like, unfortunately, all of our leaders try to pretend that they're in the story where they're going to take on the elite even though they are the elite. And they don't accept the responsibility. And that's what's going to happen. No one's going to take responsibility when the country collapses.
And boost their own autonomy. Eric von Levin also points this out in his book, Menace of the Herd. Quote, "There is no doubt that a republic is the ideal form of government for an aristocracy. An aristocracy which wants to rule directly, instead of serving a ruler, has practically only the choice between an ephemeral monarchy of the English type or a downright republic after the pattern of Venice, Genoa, or early Florence. Monarchy was historically always the best protection against any sort of oligarchical rule, and it was the historic role of monarchs to side with the lower classes against the nobility. And in my opinion, our focus shouldn't be to topple the elite and give power into the hands of the people or whatever, but rather the focus should be to change the ruling elite in favor of another one. Elections, as I have showcased, don't guarantee that this change in leadership actually happens. They don't decide anything. If anything, it just makes controlling the majority easier for the establishment by giving them an illusion of choice, which just entrenches their grip further. In a monarchy, for example, you know very well who rules and who has the power, which is the king, and you also know who the noblemen are. And
if you want to know more, I have an entire video on why we need the monarchy. You can watch that video later.
It starts losing their grip on power, blood is gonna be spilled, and heads are gonna start rolling. For this reason, they have to be much more careful when ruling, because that target is not gonna be taken off their backs. But in a democratic republic, you don't know who is actually pulling the strings behind the scenes. The elected official is merely the face of the nation. It doesn't guarantee that he is actually in charge. If you believe today that Joe Biden is the one actually in charge and has power, you probably need to get your brain checked. And when the ruling elite starts faltering, they can
And he needs to get his brain checked.
very easily shift the blame on the elected official and get the people to vote him out. The people think the problems are over, and the elite just has to start influencing the next guy that comes into office. Nevertheless, my points stand clear. Populism is nothing more than a myth. A lie propagated to make the people think they are the ones who are in charge, or could be in charge. Remember, Donald Trump isn't the average Joe. He is a billionaire with a lot of influence and connections. And when actual grassroots popular movements spring up, they fall apart completely. Hierarchies are good and natural, and there is nothing we can do to change that.
Alright. And I guess to end it here, because this is an hour and 8 minutes long of watching this video through. I really gave a lot of commentary, and I'm proud of that, because honestly, bro, this was a good video. I really enjoyed it. You know, again, another common Lavader W. I think the only thing I would say that we may have disagreed with, again, could just be on religious opinions, maybe. Even then, it's a little bit, you know, we agree on a lot of things. And I think, other than that, maybe it could be direction. But yeah, we agree on a lot of stuff. I think we both really understand and comprehend that populism is not going to lead our country to success. And you know, I think he's in another country. He's in Germany currently. So for me, it's not going to lead my country to success. It's not going to lead his country to success. You can't have this whole, you know, populist movement. What you really need to do is have an elitist movement. Obviously, you need a, you know, large chunk of the people to really help in, you know, a lot of areas. But what you especially need to focus on the most is being able to sway the elites on your side. You need the high institutional people on your side. You need geniuses. You need young talent. You need the youth. You need a lot of upcoming stars, and you need those stars to side with you and help you out and, you know, push whatever you have. And then, you know, eventually you get most of the people on your side. That's kind of how it works. So would you rather have the elite and a large chunk of the people, or, you know, the, you know, majority or whatever, silent majority, which failed in 2020, and have, like, the elites on your side and even a little bit pissed off at you? You know, get what I mean? And I guess we'll end it here. And remember, the Tower of Babel. We can't be prideful. And we gotta understand that. It's God who's above all. And we gotta stick with God forever. And, you know, that's just how it will be. And we really need to accept this. We can't really say that we're, you know, humans are able to create this grassroots movements and can create social coherence and can make things better. Because humans make very stupid decisions. You need literally people who could be superhuman to be able to lead and change things, and that's what makes kings special, and actually be able to do things effectively. They're almost superhuman. And that's kind of how I'll conclude it there. It's not about the Tower of Babel. But, you know, they were grassroots, but they rejected God. We need people who fear God, and, you know, whether it's 99% or 1%, it's really about uniting into 100%. That's what we need. 100% under God. I guess that's it. And thank you so much for watching this video. Comment down below if you enjoyed. And yeah, Bennett out.